So by way of brief introduction, Matthew Pines, I'm the new executive director of the Bitcoin Policy Institute. I have an interesting career. I studied physics and philosophy undergrad, did public policy, and then became a consultant for the US government for about 15 years, really helping the government think through kind of what-if scenarios, mostly really bad scenarios. Things like nuclear war, pandemics, cyber attacks, sort of the worst-case scenarios that the government has to look around those corners and develop prudent plans for. And about 5-6 years ago, I started to think about Bitcoin in that lens. What is the long-term strategic implication for the US government if Bitcoin were to continue to monetize, say to reach some meaningful fraction of gold, or even surpass gold? And I looked around at that time, I realized this wasn't a question that anyone was even thinking to ask, let alone attempt to answer. So I wrote the first white paper for the Bitcoin Policy Institute, which hopefully helped jumpstart this really impressive organization that I've been proud to help lead now and over the past month, and really kind of a fortuitous moment here. So I see this as kind of me trying to catch the football that I threw to myself about 5 years ago. So the topic of my talk this afternoon, which is going to be kind of a run-through of geopolitics and geoeconomics and Bitcoin. Hopefully it doesn't go too down into the weeds, but I want to try to get some of the abstract discussions we've had this morning, which are really about painting a picture of the future and the vision of Bitcoin in America, and to start thinking about the practical context in a pretty radically changing world order. So I'm going to highlight what I think are the, an honest look at the challenges that the US faces in the geopolitical and geoeconomic sphere, highlight where I think challengers are coming from our rivals, and where Bitcoin is poised to play a significant role. So a quote from an important movie: "The days move along with regularity, one day indistinguishable from the next, a long continuous chain. Then suddenly there is a change." We saw that change happen last Thursday, and it was foot-stomped by the Crypto Summit on Friday. And hopefully, I think today will act as a catalyst to push this even further. There's a particular quote in that executive order that I knew drew my attention, I'm sure drew the attention of national leaders and policymakers around the world, which was, because there's a fixed supply of Bitcoin, there is a strategic advantage to being among the first nations to create a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Kind of a remarkable statement for the President of the United States to put in an official executive order. I think the question we have to ask is why? Why is that the case? So a really simple scheme that I think about when I think about the geoeconomic system, the relationship between the global economy and geopolitics, essentially, is this three-legged stool that has underpinned the global order that we all grew up in, that has determined the course of our professional lives and the lives of our national leadership, is this relationship between the G7 countries, which provide the dominant source of credit and capital in the global system, intersecting with raw materials coming out of mostly OPEC countries, right? The core energy commodities that fuel the global system, and the sort of goods and manufacturing sector, which has been dominated increasingly so by China. And when those sort of three parts of the global order were in sort of frenemy mode, agreed to cooperate in a global order, you had relatively smooth sailing when it came to the basic structure of the global system. I think we've seen since COVID, and then accelerated after the Ukraine war, each element of that system come under acute stress. So we've seen increasing, more overt sanctions and sabotage, political warfare, economic and financial warfare, stress relationship between the G7 countries and Russia, a critical member of OPEC+. And then you've seen as China has emerged as a major rival to the US, increasing tensions, sort of sub-threshold, and influence in cyber operations, and then a response by the US to de-risk, impose export controls, et cetera. Meanwhile, the relationship between China and OPEC+ countries, in the Gulf in particular, has really flourished. And the establishment of more like technical facilities and financing programs like the Belt and Road Initiative, the Digital Silk Road, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Global Development Initiative, Chinese yuan-denominated swaps, cross-border interbank payment systems from China, the BRICS Bridge, gold oil in Shanghai. These are all sort of geoeconomic developments that have accelerated in the past few years. We've seen an implication of all these changes on the markets, right? The markets aren't just driven by sort of earnings expectations. They're driven by these structural changes: reshoring, realigning, rearming, and rewiring. And now national security and fiscal dominance tend to override market forces. We also face an environment that the incoming administration is trying to address of structural imbalances in the global system, rising debt, and competition, straining relations. As a result, the US, in particular sovereign bond market, is increasingly fragile and has had to be managed. And so this is the context in which we need to think about US's geoeconomic strength or fragility. The debt market has become fragile as a result of just the sheer scale of the issuance that has started to outpace the ability of the traditional institutions to sort of intermediate that debt issuance. And we've seen examples of this result in acute crises that the Fed has to come in and bail things out. So things look stable, then they break, and then pretty soon you've got trillions of dollars of QE. Another effect of that increasing debt issuance is it's squeezing out critical fiscal space to support our strategic requirements. In particular, we're now paying more on our interest payments than on the defense budget, a thing that the Defense Department is acutely aware of. This is now generating an increasing sense of national security risk. We no longer have the defense industrial base to keep up with the demands of strategic competition. We're aggressively trying to reshore and build out those capabilities, but the timelines to establish those production lines and actually produce the sheer quantity of the munitions to credibly deter China is an acute challenge. Meanwhile, China is continuing to press their strategy forward to dominate global industrial production, climb value chains. And so they've gone from about 6% in 2000, and they're targeted to get roughly half of global industrial production by the end of the decade. Not just an industrial strategy, they're also trying to export their model of digital authoritarianism that's based off of their tech stack and their ideology. This is seen through the distribution of subsea telecommunications cables, but you can also look at maps of exports of Huawei, ZTE, Hikvision, the penetration of Alipay, the now increasing proliferation of really advanced AI models coming out of China. This is a digital competition that has a physical substrate, but is all about dominating and ensnaring the global South and increasingly parts of the West into a geoeconomic and technical network that is ultimately determined and owes allegiance to China and China's model of digital governance. In the monetary sphere, which is the connection to Bitcoin, they have a determined strategy. They recognize they're not going to be able to completely replace the hierarchical correspondent banking network that the US built over many decades after the 50s, but they don't really have to. They can use digital technologies to create more efficient, sort of cross-bridge, central bank to central bank CBDC systems that provide, to first order, a resilience against being sanctioned, because now they can settle most of their trade with their partners in the Middle East and Asia, and they can link increasingly more nodes in the global economic network to them. And they can use systems like Enbridge in particular to make themselves more resilient to sanctions and also to build their influence over time. So the BIS incubated this China-backed project. It was quite successful in that pilot stage, and it was only when it was basically already done did the US realize what was happening and then decided to try to kill it, but at that point it was already implemented. And now, of course, Trump has tried to sanction BRICS countries if they attempt to establish a new currency. Now, the Ukraine war marked a phase shift in another key dimension of the structure of the global system, where the Treasury security, which has functioned as a global reserve asset for the past 50 plus years, is increasingly being substituted for gold, especially by central banks, which are accumulating gold on a structural basis for the past 10 years, and that has only accelerated in the past 6 months. Now, where does Bitcoin fit in? The US government last week recognized Bitcoin as digital gold for its unique properties. It's scarce, it's liquid, it's decentralized, it's portable, it's fungible, it's verifiable, it's censorship resistant, and it's natively digital. So it has all the aspects of regular gold, but for the 21st century. And we've seen hints, although it's still emerging as a speculative emerging reserve asset, it has responded in many ways as a safe haven in some circumstances, like the 2023 SVB bank failures and the response to the 2022 Ukraine invasion. So it's showing some hints where it trades as a risk-off asset, some where it trades as a risk-on asset, but as it continues to monetize, these portfolios are thinking about Bitcoin as digital gold. This is translating to changing perceptions by global investors and policymakers about how Bitcoin fits in to their portfolios as major capital managers, but also sovereign funds and national reserves. Larry Fink, just a few months ago, was on stage talking about his conversations with sovereign wealth fund managers. And the conversation wasn't, should we buy Bitcoin or not? It was, what should the allocation be? 2%, 5%? And Larry Fink, who's usually quite cautious with his words, said, if everybody had that conversation, it would be $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 Bitcoin, where it would become, start to rise, meaningfully close to gold. So this is the context in the changing world system that I think we need to think about last Thursday's executive order. That landed on the desk of every major president, central bank, and finance minister in the world. There is now discussions happening, taskers going out through those different bureaucracies about how to interpret that. What does that mean for their own country's relationship to Bitcoin? And governments don't move too fast, but when they do, they move in size, they move in scale, and they can deploy trillions of dollars of capital, and they can have geopolitical effects. And I think we could be at this inflection moment where the geopolitical aspects of Bitcoin start to become extremely important and could shape the next several years of Bitcoin's future. It seems clear that the Bitcoin race is now on, and the ball is in our court to maintain our advantage. Thank you.